Anticipate you waxing long on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Victory Never Sleeps. As you might have noticed, we are still doing the Gylfaginning. I anticipated us rocking through last week, but we have important material yet to cover. Again, it's not a long piece, but it's a really important piece. And one of the things we get to talk about tonight is the goddesses. And most people are familiar with Freya and with Frigg, but the other lesser known of our goddesses are important to pay some attention to. And I think very often they get lumped into, the 12, handmaidens of Frigg. And that's not wrong, but when you lump something like that, and I'm already starting with my rabbit trails, but I think they're important. When you lump people, persons together in that way, it's hard to flesh out an individual understanding or an individual relationship with each of these goddesses, especially when the material's rather slim on them. And, I think it's kind of the same way we run into with a number of our heroes, almost as if you say them in the same breath. And so I like to, when I can, separate things out. And I like to make sure tonight we're going to have enough time to mention them each individually and talk about them each a little bit individually. And it's interesting, this is kind of something that Svan and I discussed when I was going over, how we were going to write this part up in the Truland. Just having some of those discussions about the associations with each of these goddesses, and a little bit more detail about what their name means, and what some of the significance that they can have for our modern worship. So it's going to be a good show tonight. Again, we're not going to rush it on this one, so stay tuned for that. I think at the top of the show stuff for everybody. You guys are awesome. You guys' generosity continues to impress, as it always does. Making progress on some things. Wanted to give you the weekly, and specifically, I guess today, the monthly update on where we're at with paying off phrase off. So we owe $78,078. You guys are awesome. We appreciate it. If you guys are interested in helping with that, we always appreciate it, and you can do that at donate or runestone.org/donate, and that'll get you where you can donate to any of our causes that we're raising money for. You guys have been, and continue to be amazing with that, so we appreciate it. We also today donated our quarterly contribution towards helping our folk that are in South Africa, and that's particularly important to us. It is, they're members of our folk that have been mistreated for quite some time. It is typically not popular to acknowledge their mistreatment and acknowledge that it is specifically ethnically targeted against our folk. So it's always good to help those folks out. I don't claim that we have the perfect fix for things, but we did start, I don't know if it's 2017. I don't know. At some point, we decided, we'll do something and we'll try to help out. So collectively, the AFA raises money, and every quarter we'll pay that money out towards a charity that is helping our folk over there, very often with food insecurity. So we're able to do that again today. Thank you for everybody who donated to it. And I was running a number, while I was a little bit stuttery there over our Freyshoff thing, because Nick did an update on it and I wanted to run the math. If every member of the AFA were to donate $106 right now, we would instantly be paid off of Freyshoff. A couple other, while we're on fundraising stuff, Mandy and I have been here in Tennessee, in lovely Jackson County, for almost 2 months now, and getting settled, getting kind of stuff going on beautifying and taking care of the Sigerheim property, and preparing the planning and groundwork, and just kind of getting things in order for Tiershoff. To move on Tiershoff is going to be the first purpose-built Hoff of the Asatru Folk Assembly. It's an entirely different animal than getting an existent religious building and repurposing it. This is going to be from the ground up a temple to Lord Tyr. It gives us opportunities to put in a lot of the labor and a lot of the construction of it ourselves, which is a really special thing to do, and an opportunity for AFA friends and members to be able to contribute and help out, which is always a nice thing. And it gives us, another way to imbue that with our devotion. But building a new structure from the ground is much more expensive than finding a good deal on a building that there's very little market for somewhere else. So I think that the costs in that are probably a little bit more than we used to on some other stuff. Got different plans. We'll see how it comes. One of the options is us taking out a loan for the entirety and paying it off over time, kind of like we do with all of the other Hoffs. If that happens, we're waiting until we have paid off Freyshof before we can do that. So that's just something to keep in mind on, what's at the end of that road on paying off Freyshof. Another idea, if we can, and we'll see depending upon what we got to work with, is being able to do it piece by piece by piece. And if we can do it that way, we can raise money for individual steps of the project, and we could do that concurrently if that becomes available. So just keeping you guys abreast of the situation there. Before we get started, okay, so you guys are able to follow along tonight. We will be reading out of the Gylfaginning. Nick, do you know what chapter we're on off the top of your head?
35, I believe.
35. So we'll be starting number 35. I say chapter, section 35. It's not really a stanza in this work. But yeah, we'll be starting that. We are reading off of the translation that's at velusbau.org. You're welcome to follow along in whatever translation you have. So feel free to go there. And G.W. Farnsworth, as always, you're starting us off with your generosity. We appreciate it so much. $25 towards the Thorshof Heat, $25 towards paying off the Sigerheim property. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Also, Stephen in Japan, another very frequent donor to us. We appreciate you so much, Stephen. $5 towards the Thorshof Heat, $10 towards paying off Freyshof. Much appreciated. And Gilbert. Again, we got very consistent donors that do so much for us. Gilbert donated $150 towards that Thorshof Heat. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Thank all you guys. We appreciate you so much. I think that's what we've got for the top of the program today. Yeah, I don't think there's any prep work folks need to get right into the text tonight. I think it's kind of self-explanatory. Svan, if you could kind of pause at the end of each of these goddesses, because again, it's not like a section break. So, if you can do that so we can digest or address any questions or points on that. And yeah, with that, thank you all for joining us tonight. And Svan, take us into the text, if you will.
Yes, sir. Oh, and I did want to say pronunciation of the goddesses, their names, for those that a lot of people struggle. So we're going to be covering that too. And I'm just reminding everyone, if you got a chance, please write down the holy goddesses' names, and if you need to, how they're pronounced, so that way we can start correcting culture back towards the Old Norse pronunciations and things like that. So
a note on that. We're doing it again. Our best. You may run into different things. So nobody knows exactly how Old Norse used to sound. There's a lot of theories back tracing, like the evolution of language. And there are experts with different theories and ideas about how it might have sounded. Linguistically, it is mutually intelligible with modern Icelandic. So you may run into words and pronunciations that Dr. Jackson Crawford might pronounce differently, because he's one that has some different linguistic theories. He is lettered in that. I'm not going to take away from his expertise, but those are theoretical. So when in doubt, we kind of err on the side of modern Icelandic pronunciation of Old Norse. Don't claim perfection, but we are doing our best with it. Feather in our cap and a little bit of nod to legitimacy is my co-host is a son of Iceland, and he has feasted upon the rotten shark.
He's coming.
So he is imbued through decayed shark with linguistic knowledge of his ancestors.
When I moved to Tennessee, I'm going to bring some Haukarl and we're going to eat it together.
It's probably the same exact piece that you grew up with.
Cut from the same shark.
once it's rotten, I don't.
They just take a little nibble over Thorabla
There you go.
the next year.
So I don't know if anybody has tried that. That used to always, when I got involved in Asatru, that was kind of the fun thing, is people would get some of this rotten shark from Iceland, and then everybody'd have like a little tiny taste of it at Thorabloat and run around finding it disgusting and trying to wash it down with some Brennivín. Yeah, so I've had it. It's gross, but you kind of want it to be. I think you'd be disappointed if you had it and like it wasn't. So,
one thing that too, the Old Norse and why we are utilizing and making an effort to reach into correct pronunciation. If you look at all, I've been practicing Asatru since 1994. I've been devoted to the gods. I took my oath of professing to the gods, and I didn't always use Old Norse as a primary ecclesiastical language. I kind of did as everyone does in America. And so I think a lot of people might get it into their heads that I'm the reason there's the push for this. But the reality is no matter what branch, you may see Anglo-Saxon that are trying to do their own thing, or Normani, or Gothic, or even modern German, like the Ehrman Gesellschaft folks. And no matter what, any one of those tendrils that you go down, they are pulling from Old Norse. And if you go and look, you can't take 5 steps without Old Norse, because it is our most concrete and substantial body of lore that survived the Christian overtake of Europe and its slow progression. So Aesir has decreed in this sense, and I think this is a very wise thing for our children and for our future. We should not look at it in separate groups, but instead in the timeline of itself. This is the last step off. This is where the main body of lore is. And so now, as our children look back, they're not going to get confused and say, well, daddy taught me that his name is Wotan, but here it's Odin or Odin or what have you. So there is a great need for consistency and clarity. And I think that's
just a note on that. And this is not Svan nerding out about his memories of the rotten shark. It's something that I think is really important, and it's something that I think that maybe you appreciate the importance over the years that you've been doing it. But it's, again, all the source material 90+% of the source material goes back to the Old Norse. And in reading it, sometimes it makes a substantial difference. And it's funny, as complete amateurs as we are at it, the more that we pick up in our efforts, the more when we're reading the lore, we notice things that are important and make a difference. And different translators at different time had access to less things than we do now. But I forget where it was, but we've run into translations where they'll straight up say Frigg when the text says Freya.
Right.
Now, I think that even somebody who doesn't speak Old Norse, if you look at the text, you would see the difference in the original language. But you do pick up differences. The other thing is consistency. One of the things going on in Asatru for a very long time is you have this uneasy combination of modern English, Old English, Icelandic,
German,
Swedish, continental German, mismatch of a lot of different things. And you get that with customs, you get it with the deities, and you get it with a lot of different things, and it produces confusion when you have overlap. So linguistically, modern English is always fine. Nobody's out to give go with what you're comfortable with. That's fine. Even, German or whatever you do, that's fine. But as the AFA, when we're presenting and trying to teach and present this to our folk and to the world, we want to do it in a way that's consistent and in a way that is unified. And I found, though we're tying together a far-flung people with far-flung traditions, being able to do it in a way to where the pieces fit and match up syncretically, it increases the momentum and the potency of what we do. The things align. We take the chaos that we find and we shape order out of it, and we bring that order back into it. The other thing, and Nick pointed this out, we could have done this. If the same would be true if we did this all in German, if we did it all in Anglo-Saxon, or if we did it all in, Norwegian bokmål, or we did whatever. But picking one and going with it is important, and Old Norse is where our lore comes from. And importantly, the Norse context that's the context that the Allfather brought this to our founder. That is the context, the cultural expression, the linguistics. That's what was presented to our founder, Steve McNallen, way back in the 1960s. So that's what's brought us to the dance, and those are some of the reasons that we're sticking with it. But Svan, without further ado, if you would start section. All right, further ado. Jarrett in Virginia donated $100 towards Thor's Hofkeep. Thank you, Jarrett.
Oh, wow.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And with that, would you bring us into section 35?
All right. Okay. Of the goddesses. Then said Gangleri, which are the Aesir? Howard said, Frigg is the foremost. She has that estate, which is called Fensaller, or the glimmering moors, the glimmering wetlands. And it is most glorious. The second is Sauga. She dwells at Sokvabekur, and that is a great abode. So right out the gate, obviously, there are the two predominant goddesses in our faith, and we kind of view them in that sense. So Frigg is established. Did you want me to stop at every goddess in the text or at the end of the section?
That's the thing about this, the way it lays it out, but I would like us to say a little piece about it. Let me pull up the Truligmal on it.
Yeah, or while you do that, to context for people, there is something you're going to notice about the Aesir and why the construction in other attempts to formulate our religion, there have been groups, and there are still groups attempting to do it. And what they're doing again is trying to present a way to bring some of the, not so much the chaos, but just it's not laid out, and they want to lay it out for you. And what they end up doing is they don't differentiate key concepts sometimes. And in this, we clearly are using the Gylfaginning as our base of lore for our theological framework. So in this list, you'll notice the wife of Thor is not there, Sif, or Skadi, or Yarth. Again, the mentioning of and the idea of who is a Jotun, who is an Aesir, and then there is these others as they and again it purposely alienates where I think it's beneficial for people to try to paint this idea that the others are somehow a completely different race. They're trying to create this false paradigm that the gods are mixing with peoples from outside of themselves, when in reality the Jotuns are, I guess, or again, even Lord Odin and his descendancy. And then they don't differentiate Jotuns of Niflheim or Muspelheim or Midgard, because they want to create this kind of false framework. And so sometimes they call them Jotun brides. And I think that ultimately, as they are joining the gods, they are shifting from a mode in the universe as beings of non-biological willful intent of great power. They are moving from one team to another. That doesn't mean that the other team is completely an alien. They are of the same source, the ancient beings, and that's what Jotuns really are. They join the gods, and instead of calling them troll brides or Jotun brides or some sort of other, the word Austvenir is used. And
so that's a thing. A Norwegian marrying a Dane is a different order of thing than a Norwegian marrying a Tutsi or some, other order of being. So in the just kind of pieces here, and we'll do this. So from the Trulimo, Frigg's name means beloved. Mother Frigg is the wife of Odin and the queen of the Aesir. Frigg's divine femininity is exemplified within social order as the noble lady of the hall, as dutiful wife, and as loving mother. Wives, mothers, and ladies of station look to Frigg's example. Men often look to Frigg for comfort and warmth. And I am frustrated with this. I don't know if anybody has ever written stuff. Every single time I read the document, I catch a typo that needs fixing.
Oh, no. Well, there's another point that is not so differentiated. In the Gylfaginning here, we will notice that there is kind of a mashing together. So what we try to do is imagine much like the turtle brooches that Nordic women wore in the past, that the two brooches that support and hold everything together are Frigg and Freya, or Fruya if you're a Crawford person. Since you had mentioned like the theories of things, and one of his is that EY is like a sound, but it's not really, nobody knows. But the idea that the two turtle brooches, the two main divine feminine, is Frigg and Freya, and this is juxtaposed, or I don't know, not even juxtaposed, just in comparison to the masculine, where we have the tripartite or the three, and we see it in the names of the days of our weeks: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the Nordic people will say, "Oh, you guys are LARPing as Vikings," but you're not, discounting the fact that it's clear that it was a pan-Germanic religion, but nobody else has stake on it anymore. So it's the masculine is built in a tripartite in leadership or focus, and just like that, there is a duality focus in the feminine. And these are unique to each other in the masculine and feminine. And I think it's important to look at it, notice it. So that's why the emphasis on the two major goddesses, and then the maidens of Fensaler, and then the aus Venir, the most beloved, or because Venir means like friend. So an aus Venir is just a beloved friend or a beloved companion. And it gives them honor without calling them, oh, these are the mail order brides. I mean, that's kind of the value that they kind of put when they say like the Jotun brides. And they also, again, want to keep that separation, just like they want to separate the Vanir. It's all an attempt to dissect the gods, which in reality, I don't think they even truly believe in, but it's because they're, again, these are Proto-Indo-European Aryan gods who came in and took us. So we're going to dissect things and make it, more kosher. And so you end up,
Oh, well, I was going to say that, and Sarah brings it up, Gefjun brings it up in the chat, but I think this is important. One of the things to note with the polarity between Frigg and Freya is the difference in Aryan religion between cow and horse goddesses.
mm-hmm.
And there are different sides to femininity that are exemplified with different emphasis and in different ways. And I think that's kind of a unique station that women find in life and in the social order. And Frigg is very much the exemplar of the cow goddess status of the femininity within social structure, with dignity, with the propriety of wife, mother, in the station of having that very domestic, socially binding role that's very important. And she displays that, and she displays it in its regal proportion. And we'll talk a little bit more about Freya when we get to her, but remember, when we do get to her, she exemplifies more of the horse goddess. So you also mentioned in your the section that you read, because again, they're all going to come quickly, you mentioned Sauga. So from the Truigmal, Sauga's name means the seeress. She drinks daily with Lord Odin. There they share stories of heroes and drink in gladness. Sauga is the keeper of lore and history. She is the teller of tales, the recaller of deeds. Sauga takes notice. She remembers. Sauga is the patroness of history and genealogy. So one of the things that was really important in just going through and nerding out over language, because we play fast and loose with the little apostrophes over letters and stuff, we get different meanings. And this is one of the cases that's really important. Everybody reads her name as Saga, which, is a, I guess, biographical telling. But her name actually means seeress, like prophetess, seeing into the future. So much of her modern worship and lore is based under her role as historian. And I don't think that's illegitimate. And clearly, when you find that close of a linguistic connection, there's often overlap in the deep etymology of it. But her role as foretelling and seeing the connectivity of the skein of Urther as it plays out, I think is very relevant and very important when we think about her.
And also a lot of looking at the very word seeress. The seeress is a seer. They in the past sense or the account sense of history and the telling of the stories or the knowing of all of that is by witnessing. And then the mystical and beautiful and divine part that goes beyond even our comprehension is the ability to witness that which is coming out of, or what could come out of, the actions in the present. So I think, a lot of people get twisted up in the conceptualization. Oh no, she's the goddess of genealogy, or she's the goddess of stories, or what have you. And these guys are saying she's a seeress. Well, much like battle is to all the gods, there are many goddesses who are spoken of as having the sight to see forward. And I think it all really does come down to seeing and witnessing both the past, the present, and the future, and why Lord Odin seeks to sit with her and drink. Now, there's another thing that also comes up, and I wanted to do this because in the True Lamel, and why the Gylfaginning is so important to the framework of our faith, she is not mentioned in the Grimness Mal, and with the list of the goddesses. And this has led some room for people to go, oh, well, then maybe she's actually just another side of Frigg. And I don't think that's a good enough reason, but that's really the only reason why they do it. I don't know if the intention is to, why is Lord Odin sitting with Saga to pick her brain and speak with lore with her and not his wife. And they're trying to create some sort of paradigm, forgetting that, again, our connectivities, the way that we show the gods interconnecting is a way that we can relate to. So the other point of this being is that they use just a little bit of a fragment or a something missing to fill in their own spots. You got to be careful with people doing that. That's disingenuous. I've noticed it both in the scholarly sense and also in the scholars who are trying to formulate some of their own religious ideas. They do the same thing with these translations, and then they bank on people not reading or looking at these translations, and they can push these ideas. That's why the Asatru Folk Assembly has always said we don't have a preferenced translation. You should read them all. And the difference between scholars and us is that we are interpreting from a religious standpoint with sincerity in belief in the gods. So our attempts at understanding the literature, which is flawed, it does have missing parts. There are things that sometimes I think might have been dropped simply because they threw off the poetic meter. We are attempting to look at all of these things to create clarity and give respect. And I think a lot of scholars don't do that. They formulate ideas, they cram the gods into little boxes and squares without any considerations or giving really any reasoning. And you'll find this when you look up Saga, where it is this kind of concept that she might be another part of Frigg. And as Alzirgoli said, one of the great powers of in the cow goddess sense, is the importance of the power that the feminine gains when they give oaths. So children don't give oaths in society. They are underneath their parents' charge. Men must give oaths to sacrifice their life in defense of the whole. And women who show up and marry, this is the first transaction of oathing and that kind of, I will join into this, I will commit to this. And that brings them into societal station. And that's why they were so strong in Norse and Germanic society. So that's one of the things that you'll see is the Frigg substantiation is about power level based on oaths, oathing up into the strata of society and making new society, literally, through the birthing is a huge point.
So,
oh,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Whereas, and this is no less than, Holy Freya, in her kind of sense, is incomplete. Where the gods have like Odin and Frigg, Thor, Sif, but there's Freya, and Other has fallen off. And what this kind of makes is like a magnet or something looking for a polarity. There is a pull just as much as there is a push with Freya, and she is no longer bound by these oaths that a woman would have in society, but she then becomes one that's pulling other things. And oftentimes in the stories, it manifests as other Jotuns constantly trying to link that point.
So let's save that until we get to Freya.
Yeah. All right.
So we're jumping the gun a little bit. Now we're gonna flip the script a little bit here, and I'm gonna do the reading for the next little bit because it's just like a sentence here and a sentence there and a sentence here, and it doesn't really make sense. So I'm gonna read the sentence read the little blurb in the Gylfaginning, and we can say a bit about each of these ladies as we get there. Third is Heir. She is the best physician. From the Theological, Heir's name means mercy. She helps and heals. We pray to her for healing of the mind, body, and soul. Heir is the patroness of doctors and medicine. So in modern times, I think one of these maidens of Fensaler that has really caught on in the popular consciousness of our folk is Heir. In this time, we have so many people that deal with different health struggles. There has been a consistent effort to worship Heir, to make offerings, to hail her during Sumbul, and to build relationship that way. She is, I was going to say, I think she is probably the best known of the, as we would call the maidens of Fensaler. But I think especially in this time where so many of the struggles that our people face are, there was a time where a lot of the struggles were battlefield related or were famine and crop related. Right now, a lot of struggles, because if we live long enough, they all start to catch up with us as various health struggles. But something to be said for that. It's, certainly traditional, like I broke my arm stuff, but also help with healing of mental anguish and things, of ill health psychologically. And at different times, we have people dealing with that at different levels too. And also, one thing that we bring up on the show a lot that is a common theme is the soul sickness of our people. And it displays in a lot of different ways. But I think she interfaces with the healing of that in a way too, when we talk about mind and spirit in there. So, Svan, do you have anything to add on Heir?
It's sad in the sense that I think as our people are sickened by those who are consolidating all the food production in to small choke points, and that sickness is flowing into our people. One of the big things that I think Heir is doing and is a active and willful part of the return to cleaner eating, the return to that diet is medicine. And one of the things that I think that people should look at if they're interested in building these connections is looking at medicine and how medicine is described and utilized by our ancestors. The idea of the leech craft, the leech craft, and obviously the worm is named after actually the medicinal sense and what it was used in. It was used in medicine craft. The worm is, it's not the craft of the worm, it's the craft of medicine, and the worm was utilized, so they called it a leech. But they also called the leek and the garlic or garlic. And I think that is a huge thing when we start looking at their health benefits and diet and the absorption of nutrition is a huge part of the overview of her dominion. It's not simply like a pharmaceutical thing or something like that. So, you know, and I always like to pretend that when the folk come home and we have the gods of our people and the nation as a people together as one, there would be statues to her all over at every hospital. But I think it's important. There's a reason why one of the rivers in heaven is called the Garlic River, and flowing through Etheval, it's mentioned in the Grimnismal, and this river, and the point of it being is its connection to healing. But that's, I mean, you covered everything.
Well, so something I didn't cover that Gefjun is asking, what is the connection between Heir and Lifjeberg, the healing mountain? And it's mentioned in Fjolsvinnsmal about her residing there and it being a place where offerings are brought and people are healed.
Well, one of the things is we see this elsewhere. There are two things that in our body of lore we don't really cover, mainly because the construction of our lore was built around keeping poetic integrity. But we get these little glimpses of other things and then they're never addressed. For instance, the island off the coast of Holland, or maybe it's Holland, Belgium, I think it's Holland, that is completely dedicated to Prose Edda. So I believe that these power spots, so that our ancestors, and what I'm implying is that these little glimpses that we get through this is that there are physical places, holy sites throughout the world where the gods are deeply connected. There, whether it's a thinning of the space between the divine and the material, or if it's that they are able to manifest there or have chosen to manifest there, or whatever it may be. I believe this is again another mentioning of a holy site, and that by no means does it mean it's the only one. It's just that, especially at the time that the poem was being constructed, it clearly is, and so they make mention.
So I would like to, we'll get into the next one here, but before we do, Scott in Ohio donated $10 each to Freyshoff, to the South Africa Fund, and to the Prison Ministry. Thank you for that. We appreciate it, Scott. And Isaac in Missouri donated $25 to the General Fund. Thank you, Isaac. We appreciate it. Next up, the fourth is Gefjun. She is a virgin, and they that die maidens attend her. From the Trulenmal. Gefjun is the giver. That's what her name means. She watches over young girls and maidens of our folk. Gefjun is a comfort to those who feel alone. Gefjun is the patroness of virgins and of land taking. Yeah, anybody who is unfamiliar about the land taking situation, there's a story that she and her giant children, I know that contradicts the fact that she is mentioned being a virgin, but I want to mention something on that too. Take the form of oxen, and with a big plow, they break off a chunk of Europe that forms Zealand. So often she is one of the deities that's mentioned or worshipped during when we charm the plow at Aesir. So something to, when the depiction gets contradictory or odd, don't remember that a lot of us come from a very, very literalist background. These things are not meant to be that literally. They're meant to be expressions of cosmic truth in language and circumstance that folk understand. So when we talk about sexuality amongst the gods, it evokes a lot of things in us as humans. It evokes, passion and connection and lust and love, perhaps, and a certain closeness and a primal exchange, and a lot of different things that we all have that help us understand the concept better. But I think when we picture larger than life Vikings engaged in lovemaking, I think that's not the literal how the things work. I think we're talking about the coupling of divine forces in a way that probably is beyond our reckoning or our ability to depict. So I think that when we get really, really specific on the point of it, that misses the point. I don't think that gods necessarily need to, they can create out of nothingness. They can couple, they can do a lot of things, but so her four sons that do this plowing, don't trouble yourself over much with, but I thought it says that she's a virgin there. That kind of misses some of the point of it. Well, but her also being a source of comfort to those that find themselves lonely, that don't have that connection, that have never known that connection, or that, live their life in that solitude, that don't experience that. Sometimes there are members of the folk that, for a variety of means, sometimes medical, sometimes other stuff, live their life isolated, and that, very fundamental human connection of sexuality is not there for them. That's an isolating thing. Her being a comfort to those folk, I think, is very relevant in this day and age, and to our ancestors as well. Svan?
Couple of other things that people kind of get lost in. One is that it comes from the Heimskringla, and that is a compilation, and specifically the Ynglinga saga, the story of the Swedish kings and where they come from. All of the gods are deeply euhemerized. They are made very human, not so bad as, say, like Saxo Grammaticus, who was openly antagonistic towards the religion of his forefathers, but there are things in that story that are placed about, and it goes much to say that the understanding of things may have been miscued. And on top of this, there is a scholar by the name of John Lindau who suggests, because we also forget that Snorri Sturluson, compiling, reviewing, clarifying and keeping things together. But there were multiple writers doing the work, and that leaves room for error. And Lindau believes that the possibility is that section of the story was written and somehow kind of missed review and was from there on in. I don't know if I believe that, but I definitely think the euhemerization creates a point where they place the gods in overly realistic situations, like the connections to Troy or what have you. But this is again in a saga about Sweden that it's mentioned that her children bring the oxen that she brings are her children, and that association is made here. Not, but that she does bring the oxen and that they are Jotuns shaped. I think it's kind of strange in that sense that a lot of people kind of immediately start to try to carve things up. They do it with the Lokasana, where Loki says that it doesn't take much for her, but like a necklace for her to throw her arms around someone. And they immediately apply that to the idea that that's somehow strictly sexual, but he is very much attacking just her integrity, and that he has no problem making it very sexual with the other goddesses. So I think that's telling as well. But one thing that I would also point out, and this is kind of leaning back to what we were talking about before, the horse or the mare and the cow, and we clearly see even this point playing out through all the goddesses. Each one of the goddesses, to some degree, is kind of one ideal or another. I'm not trying to say definitively, but you can kind of see it, and I think in this case it is very much understood. There was a land taking in one of the Icelandic sagas where a woman, her husband had died on the way over to Iceland, and she had made it. And so she took land by running a cow over on the borders of the land to signify her taking of it. And we can clearly see that connection of the oxen or the cattle to claiming pastoral land. And I think that's very, very important. Her name means the giving one. And with her connection to land and to giving, I've often talked about how I believe that the gods first, that gods are with us, whether we read the sagas and the Eddas. They manifest yet still in our blood. And I definitely think that the spirit of manifest destiny is the best example of the gods manifesting in our blood, despite simply the Nordic lens. It's the post pagan heart of our people after Christianity, the promise of the giving land, the maiden, the virgin maiden, so unclaimed, is also kind of, again, metaphorical to the land. And it's all of the possibilities that the land can give forth as you claim it. So kind of that attraction of the West, the song of the beautiful maiden drawing you further in. And again, the maiden represents all the potential of that land and what that land can give, the fruits bearing forth. So
you literally described that, and it makes me think of Colombia precisely.
Yes, I was going with Colombia as well. Now, of course, Colombia does have immediate attachments to another Aryan religious structure, the Hellenics, but those connections are we will find them often throughout the goddesses, though they're not greatly expanded upon. Like there's a goddess coming up named Hlin, and there is slight nods or connections or points that we can make looking or overlaying them to say the Etruscan goddess Minerva. So as we go through the lists of the goddesses, think about the idea of the solid, the cow, the connection to expansion and order, and then there is the mare goddess, the ones who are free and wild. But the idea again is about movement. It is about the movement that makes things happen and the movement to instigate things from far away. It's society versus kind of stepping over thresholds, liminal spaces, going through other places. The mare and the horse is always associated with movement, whether it's the horses of the sun and of the day and the night, and so on and so forth. And then there is the cattle, which is their movement is always grounded in the earth, in creation, in formulation. Even, of course, later in the story of the creation of Zealand, that Gefjun takes Zealand with the 4 Jotun cattle. I'm actually of the mindset too that whether they were euhemerizing or not, this is one of those things that is like another mix-up, just like we find with Lord Vauli, where many people try to say that Loki has 2 sons, Vauli and Njörvi, and that's a misnomer. It is Vauli, the god, who turns into a wolf to slay his son. And the same goes in this sense, where we have the 4 Jotuns who come to help her, and the additions of the son's part. But as Alcirgoli said, if we get too attached in these things, then we have to take these euhemerizations of the gods literally, and that's not on multiple levels the way you should correlate with the divine. And those euhemerizations are kind of picked and choosed in the same saga. It is said that the king of Sweden is Njörður, Lord of Waters, and then Lord Odin becomes the king, and then he must be wounded so that he can go to his god. And then after that, the king Frodi comes in. And if you take that literally, that's very confusing for people. But if you look at it as what I really truly believe it is these are the cults of worship of these gods in power in Sweden that develop the royal families of Sweden. It makes a lot more sense. And they're specifically talking about an Odinic point of that cult of worship, about being pierced and not dying of old age, as part of the Odinic cult of worship. And then the cult of Frey comes into power afterwards. So this would also give lend to a lot of the theories about the Germanic migrational tribes coming back into Scandinavia at the time and bringing worship and the cult worship of Odin with them, and emphasize it when it had lost favor in the north for other cults of worship to other gods. So,
all right. Well, let's take some questions. One from Caleb. What are bird signs? So, in this context, one of the, I don't want to put it, there are moments, if you are so attuned, or if the moment is significant enough, that become transcendent, and you notice that special things happen at special times. And it's not limited to bloat, but often when we're talking about these sort of things, bloat's involved. Certainly doesn't have to be. In that context, bird signs is birds doing significant or meaningful things when fortuitous circumstances occur, often during bloat. It's something that I first really noticed observing some of Steve McNallen's bloats. He would very often get like callback responses with ravens when we do bloat at places. And again, without context to an audience, to those that haven't been in bloat or haven't experienced it, it's kind of different. And the different signs and special stuff show up a little bit differently when you're doing bloat in a hof versus when you're doing it in nature in an open space. But birds tend to be really interested, and that tends to happen in special ways. And all this is going to sound very, very odd, but there'll be birds around throughout the day. But when you go and you do bloat, and there's a silence, and then there's a impactful meaning to a thing that is done in the bloat, and you'll have a raven will croak, or you'll have songbirds that'll all of a sudden sing at the point. They'll be quiet for the rest of it, or maybe they won't be around for a time, and then they'll come and they'll perch in the tree that's by your vey or your ritual circle and stay there for a certain moment. And then maybe they'll take flight at a certain moment. There's not a real exact science to it. And I know it sounds kind of nebulous, but it's something that happens often throughout the years. As I've done a number of bloats, is seeing that. One of the things that's just was really interesting to me in my property in Palmer, Alaska, when I was up there doing bloat, we had kind of our ritual tree was right on the outside of a ritual circle, and it's where we'd leave offerings and pour out the meat after we were done with doing bloat and whatever else. And it was this old cottonwood tree. We were pretty far from the river. We were away from things, and you very, very seldom see eagles there. But there was a bald eagle that showed up at the start of bloat in that tree, sat there through the entirety of bloat with us, yelling and being loud and doing, an enthusiastic bloat. And as soon as bloat was concluded, it went about its way. And it was very, very odd. I'd never seen an eagle do that in a spot that I was before or since. So I thought that was meaningful. I know a lot of people see that and have those associations with ravens. You'll see them fly over at a particular moment, or they'll do a call and response when there's stuff going on. I know that we experienced that at Odenshof on bloats that I've done there. Again, every time that happens, is it the gods? Is it the land spirits? No, sometimes it's just birds being interested, but sometimes it is. And over time, you get a better sense of when it's significant, when it's not, and when it might be. Svan, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, that last part that you hit on is, I think, super, super important. The idea is that very often when we try to understand something, we dissect it away from its relationships to focus in on it. And what a lot of people will say, like, they'll look at bird signs, bird omenology, or it's called ornithomancy, from the Greek, the kind of communication through bird flight. But in Rome, it was the augurs, priests, that would, by way of auspex, determine things. Auspex means to watch the birds. But when we look into our lore too, it's every time it's at the starting of the trip, we saw the ravens fly. This is a good sign. And it's always correlated in the relationship to what's happening at the moment. So that is, I think, one thing that people need to remember. It is not that every time, but that when you are creating Orlaw in the world, in the well, and there is a correlation to the singularity of a moment where the Orlaw of the bird is moving at that same time, and there's deep correlative significance, whether it's symbolic or cultural or what have you. These two moments would seem like coming out of the randomness that makes augury or clairvoyance or divinatory practices is always kind of based off of the randomness of it, is that those two things colliding at that right moment often lend towards thinking and knowing that there's this correlation between the two. We do it like with Alvar. Everyone always trying, the Alvar, what are the Alvar? But they never look at the fact that Alvar is a meaning that whatever is the word in front of it, and how there's a synthesization of the being to the item. So it becomes a lot less confusing when you look at it that way. So I think a lot of people dissect things, and it causes confusion. But when we look at bird signs, it's always in correlation to great monumental or just very important moments. So going forward and looking at the signs of birds, I think you should always consider your whereabouts, and you should consider what's going on, as opposed to just simply.
There's a really delicate interplay with this, and having done ritual to our gods for 25 years now, it's interesting, to kind of compare where I was when I started to where I am now, to how these things affect. In your own digestion of these things, it's like you want to embrace the frosted and the wheat side at the same time. It's cool, and there's a value to you getting carried away and excited about the possibility of it being something special. And I wouldn't ever want to kill that. I wouldn't ever want to stomp that out. Being open to that, and especially new people being excited, thinking it's something, that's beautiful. And the enthusiasm is special there, and I don't want to kill that. But also there's a value in being skeptical and thinking about it critically, and holding out discernment on when it's meaningful versus when it's not, versus when, maybe it is. I'll think more on that. And I say that you never want to rain on somebody's parade if they're excited about something that way. Of course not. But for your own understanding of it, you do want to keep yourself honest. And if everything's special, then nothing is special. And that's something that's important to remember. If every time you see a bird, it's magical, then the time that it really is going to fade into the background. So having the discernment and being able to entertain a certain amount of skepticism, but also that childlike, youthful enthusiasm is really important. And as you do it over time, you'll be able to kind of feel when it is or when it isn't. And it's not just bird sign. You'll see it. I've had that during ritual with dogs, with wolves. One time we did did an Odin bloat at a wolf sanctuary. And it was really cool when they would howl back during bloat. It was really interesting. I've also done them on the mountainside in Alaska and heard the wolves howl back. But I've had like deer show up at really auspicious moments. So there's a lot of different ways you can interact with nature that way.
I think it's interesting too. Inauguration has connections to the augury of birds, and that clearly as being a big event. So the idea that what is happening in Orlaw at the time of the person or peoples in direct correlation to the birds, and even to the point where that event is now kind of formulated from the practice. I thought that's very interesting. I did not know that. I just read it. So I was like, wow.
So from Scott, fundraising is extremely important to the AFA. Has the AFA ever tried a casino night at any of its churches? So at the Hofs, there's different rules in different states, certainly, and different, even county, I believe, as far as charitable gaming. And some places are very strict. Some places are very wide open on what you can do that way. One of the problems that we face is proximity. So if we had a lot of members very close to a Hof doing something like a casino night or any of the charitable gaming things, makes a lot more sense. I'm not opposed to it. I've actually had people in the past looking into it. It's something that I'm not at all opposed to doing. One thing that I've, over time, and certainly when I became Heir, we were looking into all these different ideas for fundraising. And there's tons of different, you could sell chocolate bars and a percentage goes to the AFA, or you could do this thing and sell t-shirts, or you could do, come up with this auction thing. You could host a dinner that's a fundraiser. All of those things tend to have more overhead than you actually bring in. It's like the things of that I've seen, that I've been involved in. Again, if you are professional and you're at a professional level and you know how to really leverage those, there's potential there. So I don't want to just shut anything out without thinking about it. But I've seen those lose money more than I've seen them make money. What is unfortunate, but is the truth of it, the best fundraising is our Hoftoller and getting every member of the AFA as best we can to contribute as a percentage of their income. That has been a radical force multiplier in our ability to accomplish things economically. And then the other one is just asking people for money. It's hard though, because our people don't like that. It is inherently uncomfortable to say, hey guys, can you please give us some money? But realistically, when you do that, 100% of that goes towards the cause that you're asking for, instead of overhead and the supply for whatever the little gimmicky thing is, and the renting of space if you have to, or any of those hoops. When you get people that are just willing to give because you ask and say, hey, can you please give? And they do. That's what's been successful for us. And when we get people that are willing to set up recurring percentage-based payments like our Hoftoller, that has massively increased our ability. Anybody listening to this who is a member of the Asatru Folk Assembly, if you would like to contribute in that way, please talk to your local folk builder. We would love to have you do your donations by Hoftoller. It is a huge step forward in our ability to accomplish stuff. So if that's something that you're willing to consider, Hoftoller is a minimum 1% or more of your income towards the Asatru Folk Assembly. And the folks that have chosen to do that have really, really helped out. And yeah, so we appreciate it. If something you're interested, your folk builder can tell you more about it.
And on behalf of Githya Alt, I do have to say, we do take Hoftaler via Llama at Sigerheim.
So that's another thing. People get stuck on what that equals, and like there's ways to set it up through your employer to be a deduction. So a lot of American, and I say that because I don't know if this is at all the case internationally, but there's a substantial church culture in the United States. So a lot of businesses are set up for you to do percentage-based giving out of your paycheck to go directly to your church. So it works best for taxes and for everything else for you. That's a really good and convenient way. And even as the United States has become more and more secular, it's been kept in there to where a percentage can go to, you know, whatever charity of your choosing. So that charitable giving through your accounting department is awesome and super convenient, but that's not all. If you do, you know, you're an independent contractor or whatever your situation is, you can pay Hoftaler by cash, by check, by recurring credit card donation, by handing your folk builder, you know, again, like Sarah was saying, a llama or like eggs or part of your harvest or what. There's a lot of ways to figure it out to make it work. But that has been a huge thing. Very thankful for those that have chosen to give that way. And see, also to the question, I'm like self-conscious, like, oh, he's asking for money again. I don't want to do that all the time. It's not what I'm trying to do, but it is how we're able to accomplish the things we're able to accomplish. So thank you guys so much. You guys are very generous. And Scott, thank you for the question. From Caleb, can our prayers stir our gods to action? How is it similar or different from Christian prayers to Yahweh/Jehovah? Svan, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think I don't want to claim that which perhaps the nature of the prayer is the part where I'm getting kind of reservation on. I'm not here saying that the gods are going to go beat up the bully down the street because you're getting your butt kicked, because you really, really, really want them to. So prayer in the relation of a spiritual exchange, a gift cycle, I think creates harmony between the divine and the material and the folk. And in doing so, that harmony beckons blessings from the gods, kind of as if the gods are ever giving of blessings, but that when you become aligned with it, that the frequency of the blessing or of the divine, of the gods, then you too you're linked, and then you gain and harmonize with. When people are out of the gift cycle, they catch that harmony of the blessings of the divine. They still catch it now and then. It's an emanation, if you will, but it's easily as cyclable into as it is out of. So the purpose of the gift cycle, which is so important in our faith, is again that deep and correlative connection to the divine, that creating that line between the two, of the self and of the divine. I do believe that we in the material then do gain benefit or blessing of the divine in doing so. And one of the ways that you can align yourself is through prayer, but I do not believe it's through prayer alone, unless obviously we're talking about the gift cycle. Some people do consider, and I myself do consider, the gift cycle, the bloat that we perform to align ourselves is a form of prayer. So that's why I was kind of a little hesitant in the sense of like, getting at your bedside and saying like, please, Lord Thor, can you beat up the guy who stole my lunch money? I don't think it works like that. And the only reason why I'm addressing it is because over the years, Christianity has muddled a lot of ideas for itself, and it therefore passes over. So the biggest thing for anyone in Asatru is to understand that the gift cycle is extremely important. And once the gift cycle is established, and there is this attunement between the ever flowing and willful divine that can do and administer its gifts however they see fit, when you become receptive to that, then you gain those blessings and you begin to start seeing them around you. So it's not based on need. It's not based on desire. It's based on you committing to deeds to make yourself receptive to the divine. I hope that makes sense. I hope that also kind of clears the difference between our understanding of prayer in Asatru versus perhaps the praying in a Abrahamic sense. Ours is about that alignment, about receiving that emanation of blessing that flows from them at all times and can be wielded and manifested as they see fit, whether you pray to them or not. But that, again, it's like catching the sunlight between the leaves of the trees. Whereas when you start to commit to deed and you enter the gift cycle, you build relationship, you meditate, you communicate, and those I think are peripheral to the core that is the gift cycle, the placing of your will and doing the very deed of it in alignment with the gods and in alignment with the church, you as a whole. So you're doing it with all of these other Asatruer all over at the same time. There begins to have this fulfillment of kind of in tuning yourself to the ever-present emanation of the blessings of the holy Aesir. And I don't know. I could kind of talk in circles on that and go, but I hope that clarifies. And that's my position on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go a little bit different way. So I think people try really hard to make a distinction or differentiation that's not necessary. Because Christians do something doesn't make it bad or wrong. Yes, you need to engage in the gift cycle with our gods. Yes, you need to give them worship and you need to give them offerings and you need to give them devotion. But I don't see anything wrong with praying in the traditional, exactly what you're picturing in your head, praying in the by your bedside at night, praying in any of that. I don't see anything wrong with that. What I do think the distinction comes in that's important is Christianity is about your weakness in the face of things. And the only thing that is good is their God. And the only thing that is effective is their God, or invoking him or invoking his son's power in doing something. I think that's very different in our faith. I think the emphasis on you doing your part to make stuff happen is really important. But I don't think it is inappropriate or ineffective to ask the gods, specifically to ask your ancestors, but to ask the gods to help and intercede on your behalf in situations, especially if you need an extra bump on something, to get you over the finish line, or if you're out there doing the work and you need some extra luck for it, or if it's beyond your control and beyond your ability to do something. I don't think that's inappropriate at all. And you ask, can that move the gods to action? Certainly. I don't limit what our gods do. If our gods know you and listen to you and care what you have to say, they may very well decide to do you a favor and do you a kindness. They're not obliged to. You can't demand of, I mean, I suppose you can do what you want, but you cannot, like, they will not, you cannot force them to meet your demands or to do the things that you can't, like, contractually bind them to do the things that you know, did the right song and dance, you prayed in the right way, so they have to do your bidding. It doesn't work that way. They're gods and you're a person. But yes, if they're so inclined, they can absolutely be moved to help you in some way. I think they are more inclined to help you if you are, you know, out there fighting and putting in your part and doing your part on it. But I think that the big, and again, I think there's something fundamental to our people, and I don't think it's just a Jesus thing, to reach out to the divine when you are overwhelmed with things beyond your power. I think that is a human thing. I think it's what our people have done forever. I think that we've seen it in a Christian context because that's been the dominant religion of the media we've consumed and of kind of how we process imagery of the past. But I have no reason to believe that our ancestors in all different forms of Aryan faith didn't ask the gods to help them, didn't come before their altar and, you know, ask for strength or for healing or for, you know, luck in business or whatever. I think that's fine. But there is a helplessness in Christianity and a groveliness that I don't think is necessary, or I don't think is a hallmark of Asatru religiosity. But what I do think is really important about prayer is that it's genuine. I think that a false groveling is gross and dishonest, but I think that a false bravado is also gross and dishonest. I think approaching our gods with respect and with piety and with a genuine expression of yourself is the most effective route towards successful prayer with them, in my experience. Again, it's really important to always have the gods can do what they want.
Right.
They're gods. They can listen to your prayer. They can not. They can help you. They cannot. They can do what the gods want to do. They are gods. We never want to be impious by limiting that or by coming up with equations that we can somehow manipulate them to do. It doesn't work that way. They're gods.
Well, I wanted to say, like, and you had mentioned stepping in on your behalf and speaking about the prayers to the ancestors, prayers to the Lenvatir. I wanted to set that understanding about alignment and not necessarily making individual prayer the way you see it as being bad or less than. I think it, for me, is the gift cycle as the core of the rope. And then there are the outside of that rope is filled with many important and intertwined things, like producing art for the gods would be one of those things. Praying to the gods and having a verbal relationship or a mental relationship with the gods, and utilizing your consciousness to make those connections, and also turning inward and looking to the divine to help guide yourself inwardly as well. I think all of these are very, very important. I was just the point of the core, that gift cycle, that connecting of timing, with everything. And prayer is utilized so much in the bloat, in whether it's at home or whether it's at the Hof, but certainly not disconnected. I just think it's, that's that core. And the major reason why I'm bringing it up is because we talk so often about the gift cycle that our church has had with the gods, clearly bringing blessings. And I'm not claiming, it's just the observation of. And I think that that's so important that people new to Asatru and even some older folks, because I've met people in Asatru who are like, I've given horns to the gods, they should give me this. They make some contractual thing, and that is ridiculous. But all that interconnectivity, I think, is worth. And I often do say prayers to the gods at night, at bedside or in bed. But I do feel that, again, it's the communication is a relationship, but the gifting cycle is you are now, rubber meets the road. You are invested.
Well, another point that I'd like to make about prayer is it doesn't, and etymologically, it might have to run down the rabbit hole on it, but I don't think it always needs to, I don't think it always needs to be asking for something. I think there is merit to communicating things, asking, making your intentions known, making your devotion known, reaffirming a commitment. Like I'm trying to think, like asking forgiveness if you've not lived up to an obligation, expressing appreciation of just giving thanks for something, I think is completely appropriate as well. So that's just a little add to it. Something we should have gotten to when we were doing the discussions about Gefjun, that I didn't notice the question at the time. Wasn't virgin another way of saying maiden? So in other words, like an unmarried woman. Yes, and if you look at the original text that gets translated, it goes to that same maiden root. So, Fjorda Gefjun, han meir, og henni þjón þær meir andast. So it uses the root of maiden itself and not the root of virgin. But yes, since it's earliest that you can trace in Proto-Germanic, it simultaneously meant like girl, unmarried woman, and virgin. Those are kind of inseparable concepts. And I know that, in reality, everyone did not lose their virginity in the marriage bed. I know that that's not how everything worked, but those concepts were all kind of indistinguishably rolled into the concept of maiden. Archaically, your virginity would be referred to as your maidenhood. So yeah, that linguistically, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Those concepts are all rolled into that same word. So let's go back into the text here, and Sorry, I got to find my place again. I apologize. The fifth is Fulla. She also is a maid and goes with loose tresses and a golden band about her head. She bears the ashen coffer of Frigg and has charge over her footgear and knows her secret counsel. From the Trulagnol, Fulla's name means bountiful. She listens to those of our folk who need to share their thoughts. Fulla is the patroness of the well-managed home. I think that these maidens of Fensaler, they bring out different, very accessible, very I don't know, easy to wrap your head around aspects of femininity and women's roles in things, and it's brought out in a beautiful way as kind of Frigg's court of these ladies in waiting. The idea of having a trusted friend that will hear your counsel, that will give you counsel, that will hear your secrets, that you can confide in, somebody that you can give that confiding to, and the responsibility of maintaining a household, of all the different, home ec things that used to be very prominently taught to girls and young women, to being able to take care of a home, take care of a household, and manage those kind of things. It's interesting that those two concepts are married together in this goddess. But yeah, Svan, do you have any thoughts on Fulla?
I remember reading on some other, I'll say, because we are Asatru, they are, I don't know, the Norse paganism. They were trying, she's the goddess of shoes, because of the specific mention of her foot gear. They're completely missing the point that this is actually more a delegation to the royalty of Frigg, and that she is entrusted. They don't look at the concept of what that could mean in Old Norse life, but a very powerful woman in station having trust in the key things that were considered very important at the time, and having her be the entrustment of that was completely lost on them, and they kind of went on this whole thing about shoes or so. It was very strange to me, and not looking at it in what I think is so important is that not only just the gear or the accoutrements or whatever that is, there is also the secrets. So that which is tangible and that which is intangible, she holds well and organizes. And I think in modern practices outside of the shoe people, a lot of folks take that into manifestation with the house in essence, the moving in of things, the moving out of things, the woman of the house knowing what's coming in, where it goes, and where all things are, and when it's leaving, or how it's leaving, or when it needs to go. And so that heavy usage of minutia in the house, that's, I think, what is a deep connection to her dominion in our religious and spiritual life. I've even seen people go so far as to give prayers to her when they're doing things like making sauerkraut, because the idea of the cabbage coming in from the outside and being prepared and preserved and utilized to give strength to the family, that's a cycle. It's a logistical cycle of something coming into the house. And so the processes of making bounty from the fields more and giving more and organizing and keeping it in a place. And that it's not simply just one thing. It's just that processes, whatever it may be, is that dominion of her home and of the organization and of the allocation of things. The idea of not being mired in Slavic mess, because of course that's always a manifestation of a deep part of the mind and the soul being hurt. Is you can often see it sometimes in people's houses. So there's this correlation of the physicality of the world being organized and brought into correct flow. And I think that's a huge thing. And I think that's something that we also need to consider with all the goddesses, is that their dominion and how they interplay. I've said it before, the gods are vertical and the goddesses are horizontal, or intertwining horizontally, like a weft and weave. Is that the goddesses' dominions interplay in our lives in what would often be very subtle ways. I think they were far more prominent to our ancestors because survival was quite literally on the line. But understanding the dominion of the goddesses and how they pervade in our lives in very soft, subtle, and important ways is a key to building relationship with them, specifically the maidens of Fundraising. But yeah.
All right. Freya is most gently born, together with Frigg. She is wedded to a man named Oder. Her Oder. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking at I'm back and forth on the translations on the names. Sometimes they use the Old Norse, sometimes they don't. Freya is most gently born, together with Frigg. She is wedded to a man named Oder. Their daughter is Nos. She is so fair that those things which are fair and precious are called Nosir. Oder went away on long journeys, and Freya weeps for him, and her tears are red gold. Freya has many names, and this is the cause thereof, that she gave herself sundry names when she went out among unknown peoples seeking Oder. She's called Mardol and Horn Gefjun Seer. Freya had the necklace Brisingamen. She is also called Lady of the Vanir. From the Theological. Freya's name means lady. Freya displays her divine femininity in a wild and passionate way, as a goddess of sensuality, desire, fertility, and magic. Women often look to Lady Freya to unlock and enhance their spiritual might. Men often look to Freya for help in romance. Oh, and just a little blurb here, because we happen to have it in the Theological about her, and it mentions it earlier. I think we read it last week and the week prior. Her hall, Sjofn, is great and fair. When she goes forth, she drives her cats and sits in a chariot. She's most comfortable to man's prayers, and from her name comes the name of honor, Fru, by which noble women are called. Songs of love are well pleasing to her. It is good to call on her for furtherance in love. I think that Freya is very well attested. I think that people are quick to point out the sexuality and the kind of carnal nature of her character, which is valid and is a thing, but it doesn't stand alone, and it's not crass. Her name literally meaning lady, her being gently born, she exemplifies nobility and nobility of bearing. So I think that she is often misrepresented in a derogatory way, and in a, I don't know, in an obscene way that is not fitting of her station. So I know that society goes through phases, and I think that we are currently in a phase where, as a pushback against the degeneracy around us, our people in our circles tend to either be prudish or virtue signal prudishness. I think we need to be careful to have balance in how we do things and not to unfairly demonize sexuality. There's appropriate displays of sexuality, and there's ways that it's very valuable and meaningful. I don't think that we have to either be prudish or, it immediately bust out into some kind of Bacchic orgy. I think there's certainly nuance to that I think we all need to appreciate and be able to find the dignity in. It's fun. Before I go there, Jeffrey in Texas donated $50 towards the Sigerheim mower. Thank you, Jeffrey. We appreciate it. It's fun.
Yeah, I had made mention of the separation of the wholeness of two polarities with Holy Freya, and the mentioning of Other. And Other, a lot of people, again, want to linguistically connect Other to Lord Odin. The word itself is more akin to passion, and it can often be utilized in linguistically to the soul, the mind, the desire, and the passion of things. So whereas we'll talk about a goddess of love in the sense that we would often see Holy Freya addressed as, I think that changing and looking at the ideas of the manifestation of the power of passion, the power of attraction and desire, I think is more ethereal than the actual mechanics of love and societal interaction, where like even down to the point of dating and things like that. That's mechanics towards building in a relationship towards love. But instead looking at Holy Freya as the emanation of passion and love and the things that drive us towards, I would even include art, or like classical art and architecture, and the idea of surrounding beauty around us, that emanation, that desire that we have as folk, that's her dominion flowing out. And oftentimes it's interpreted as that is the Brzingamenn, is that focal point of emanation of passion emanating from her and driving the souls of the folk to search for beauty, to search for that which elevates them and drives them on. And that beauty is the opposite of death. And that her light, her life, the warmth, her fire, all of these things are against the drudgery and the fallacies of the material. It goes beyond that. And in doing so, in that big sense, she is very, very complicated as a goddess. Just as Frigg is complicated with the ideas of oathing, society, interconnectivity with the moving forward of society and royalty, the gently born, the usage of the word tingnost is royalty. That's what the gently born translation kind of means. So like Frigg, Holy Freya is aristocratic, is royally born. And we all, we know this in because of the way it's placed in the sagas, but I think also it is an elevation of dominion that's far more reaching and less nuanced, like I was speaking before. So that's why we went understanding that elevation between, and we can see it clearly around us in the observation of the worship of the goddesses, that there is a heavy emphasis on the worship of Holy Frigg and Holy Freya in different ways as their dominion pervades. And then the maidens of Fensalar, I think, are so nuanced that people are building their relationship with them now, but the cults of them are very niche amongst folk. So when we talk about, and I had mentioned that the ancient way that our ancestors looked at the gods as living on top of heaven's mountains in the valley of work, Idavol, that when he leaves and he goes to the nations of men, and then she searches after him, crying tears of gold, and the gold that, or the tears that fall in the land become gold, and the tears that fall in the ocean become amber. There is this deep poetic point of the goddess of passion, the goddess of possession, the goddess of beauty, going out and searching for that other polaric half. And nothing comes out of creation if you don't have the desire to attain, to create, to build or move forward, or that longing. It's a longing. And that, I think, is where a lot of the power of Holy Freya resides, is that longing of something to create, to formulate, to build, or make beautiful. And over and over and over again, she is clearly the most prized of the goddesses, that the Jotun, who despite their grumblings of the fact that the Aesir had slain the great progenitor of the Midgard Jotuns, Ymir, they still covet and they want her. There's that yearning, and it's about a receptive end constantly drawing to itself, and I think that has a great play in any artist who is trying to reach the pinnacle of what they're attempting to create, or any person that looks upon a statue and is moved to weeping. The beauty that lies in these techniques of traditional work is a total manifestation of the entirety of our folk in Western civilization, and she manifests that way. And that kind of thought came to me when I saw the famous painting. The artist's name is going to elude me right now. Of her weeping the tears of gold. I'm going to have to get back on the name of that artist. A modern, or not modern, but in our modern times, that essence is very mysterious, and her traveling, moving, all connecting to the idea that we were talking about before, with the horse versus the sacred cattle. The movement part is, I think, a huge thing there. And the difference between like solidification in society and the etherealness of beauty and passion being able to be not quite defined by plot of land or by boundary of nation. It's definitely horse versus cattle.
All right.
Real quick, the artist is Anne Marie Zilberman, often false attributed to Gustav Klimt.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So the seventh is Sjofn. She is most diligent in turning the thoughts of men to love, both men and women. And from her name, love longing is called Sjofni. And from the Trulegmal, Sjofn is a goddess of love. All our folk may look to Sjofn when we yearn for love and companionship. It is wise to seek her blessing when looking for a spouse. Sjofn is the patroness of lovers. One thing that I think is worth mentioning, I don't know, at any of these junctures, but here specifically, it talks about both of women and of men. It turns the thoughts of men to love, both the thoughts of women and of men. I think that sometimes we categorize the gods and the goddesses too sharply, like, oh, these are just for women to pray to, like, oh, or warriors only pray to Odin, and farmers pray to Thor, and women pray to the. And I don't think it's that way at all. I think all of our goddesses are and all of our gods for that matter, for all of our folk. And it talks specifically about a number of our goddesses here being particularly, giving an ear to mortals that have these very, very real and very relatable struggles internally, struggles with love and relationship, with loneliness, with various circumstances in life. You see, like the Havamal talks very specifically about, a young warrior traveling far from home to different halls and in different circumstance. Here you see something very relatable to people who are going through struggles internally with their emotions, with their social relationship to others. You see that in the Maidens of Fensaler and their description in a lot of ways. And I think this one is an example of that. It makes the point that it's not just for women, it's for men too, to pray to her. Svan, do you have stuff to add on Sjofn?
Yeah, I think you keying in on that. I mean, it's there it is that's so important, that interconnectivity between men and women. It's almost unspecific in the sense that it's utilizing at first man in the public sense, like all men are like Alamadur, where it's open to mankind or the folk. And then it specifically hones in on between men and women. So and I had just spoken about how oftentimes and I'm not saying you can't pray to Holy Freya for love, but that oftentimes I feel she is misplaced or misplaced in the mind of many people as specifically being some sort of kind of Aphrodite direct parallel, but we have Sjofn. The J is like a Y sound. The O with two dots is a O, and then the F in the middle of the word is a V sound. So Sjofn. And as what I was speaking of about the minutia of love in our societies, but also too, I think because of the usage of it in the broad sense of the folk. So most diligent in turning the thoughts of men to love, both of women and of men. So there's that double, it's like saying, or the interpretation of it could be that she is most diligent in turning the folks' thoughts to love, both of men and women. And that's something that I was kind of thinking about, was that there is familial love, there is friendship between, that is a form of love. And I think that forces outside of the core of Aryan social structures that have created the West try to attack a lot of these ideas about love and try to immediately sexualize them. But instead, it is good to pray to Sjofn in all cases of returning to or having that feeling of love. Now, again, more so when we talk about the love between a man and a woman, but it also, that's the core, but there is the love between brothers, and the love between, say, fraternity, or and love between parents and children, and family in general. That is far more focused. It's not so much about the longing and the passion and the creation of beauty, and so it's more about that interconnectiveness of society that holds it together, and that it isn't strictly in a sexual way. And I'm not trying to be prudish, and I'm not trying to. I'm trying
Yeah,
to.
you are.
No, I'm trying to include versus exclude. Instead of saying it isn't this or that, is that I think it is this plus the love elsewhere.
And I mean, and it's worth noting again, especially when we get into some of these things, there is a tendency to
Right.
go prudish, because in the faith tradition that has been predominant over the last few centuries, we have not been raised with the appropriate way to talk about sex and sexuality in the same breath as we speak about piety. And it's challenging, and we wouldn't want to be disrespectful or be inappropriate, so we err on the side of caution sometimes. And I think that's done out of the best of intentions. And I think that as we culturally return to our native faith, that balance will be more, will come more naturally. But again, I think as a good rule of thumb on all of this, we get it, but it's religion, and we worship our gods. As pious people, we want to err on the side of being too polite rather than being too crass. And I think that we would apply that in life to anybody that we respect. If you're talking to a parent, or your friend's parents, or your in-laws, or your grandparents, or your boss, or the governor, or whoever you're talking to, if it's somebody who you're seeking their approval and you want to be very respectful of, you always want to err on the side of not offending rather than accidentally offend by being too bawdy in the things that you say.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of times when we do talk about it, and it's like, oh, he's saying this because he's trying to be prudish and trying to deny the reality. I'm more of the mindset that the core of that, of love, but that there is the in addition to the love and of other things, and that has been kind of dulled out of our society by, I think, forces that don't want to, they want to sexualize everything. It is the love between a man and a woman, but there is also addition. So I'm trying not to exclude per se. It's that feeling of that love, the of her source coming out, that I think pervades, and it is always going back to that interconnectedness of societal dominion. Their dominion in our world is keeping and connecting. It's about relationships and those connectivity points, whether it manifests in something as simple as an organized house, or as something as great as the passion that drives an artist to seek their magnum opus. But
So getting on a couple of questions, and there's a conversation going on over in the chat. So I don't want to go over everybody's thing, but basically there's a current to like make general offerings to the gods as opposed to making specific offerings. I think that's wrongheaded. And in the sense of, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think that it's always appropriate when in doubt to, make an offering to the Aesir generally, or to hail the Aesir generally. That's always fine. So don't get me wrong, that's not inappropriate. But I do think there is, all right, any of the action that we do outside of the material realm, and again, when I start talking like this, I don't have the exact words, but when we're interacting with the gods or the ancestors, or when we're doing something ritually or spiritually or magically, intention is everything. That is our currency that we have in that plane of interaction. Money doesn't spend there. They're not really drinking the mead. It doesn't work that way. What we have is our intention. And in that sense, it really is the thought that counts, is the intentionality that's directed there that counts. So if you don't know any better, or you don't want to get it wrong, praying generally, I think is okay. But I think it is particularly meaningful to build relationship very specifically with individual gods for individual things that you want. During Sumble, when people hail the AFA, awesome. When people hail the AFA leadership, wonderful. I am proud of all of those things. If they look across and say, hey, Matt, you do great things, hail Matt Flavel, it means something different, and it is specifically meaningful. So I think that's important. If you're making offerings to the gods, I think that's nice, and it's probably smiled upon, but very particularly to one of our gods in a specific way and with a specific sharing of gifts between you, that builds a much more intimate relationship and contact. And I think that's really important. So I think that is a better tact most often. And again, there's plenty of occasions to where I'll make an offering to the Aesir generally, or I don't think that that's, ever a bad thing, but I do think there's particular value to building relationship with someone particularly. And I think we overthink, and we look at, maybe what the ancestors said about something, or what we read in a book or saw in a movie. No, we know about relationships from the moment that we're born into the world. We overcomplicate it when we try to make something that's very simple and very plain abstract. It doesn't need to be abstract. You can add things to it, but we know how relationships are with people. You know that if someone addresses you directly with a personal message, it means more than when somebody addresses you or your family or a group of people you are in a group with. Generally, it's less emotionally meaningful to you as a person. And I think we should extend that understanding to the gods. The gods are so much more than that, but we are born and built with certain ability to build relationship and to relate to other living things. We shouldn't forsake that for an abstraction. We do have some questions coming about. From Caleb, what runes are put into the horn for Sumbel? Is it appropriate to use those runes outside of High Sumbel? What about other rune combinations? So, because I know who's asking the question and I'm the one who conducts that part of the High Sumbel, I'm assuming that you're asking the runes that I put in because others may do something different. I do my bit over the horn the way that I came up and observed our founder, Steve McNowan, do. The runes are Ansus, Laugus, and Urus. The formula of that is the Alu formula. It's also, I've tried this before and I don't think you can see it. Anyways, around the Gothar ring, there is very tiny, a never-ending cycle of Ansus, Laugus, Urus, Laugus, Ansus, Laugus, Urus, Laugus, Ansus. The idea is the gods represented by Ansus, the exchange of worship of energy symbolized by the liquid of mead, of pouring out, which is the most the original form of worship by our people. It's the root of like the Goths. It's the root of the word bloat. So the gods, the liquid of transmission, and then the primal, the fleshy, the us. So from, that connection between gods, this exchange, this liquid, and us, and then us, the liquid, to the gods. So that's done over the horn. And then I, say Alu 3 times over it. Yes, that's appropriate for a lot of things outside. I mentioned that's kind of the runic way of symbolizing that gift cycle in action through the work that our Gothar perform. I think that's useful in a lot of contexts. That's that, and as I mentioned, the inverse, Alu, or I guess Ula, are runic formulas that are attested in ancient carving. There are a lot of different runic formulas you can do, where you can combine runic formula into bind runes. But that's what I do over the Sumbel horn. Svan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think you covered the totality of that, and why I think the significance of why you say it at Sumbel is the key point that people should focus on. Is yes, that breath, the manifestation of these very powerful sounds, the words of these runes going into the horn, is that the words going into the liquid, into the mead, that brings about that primal strength, that invigoration at the starting of Sumbel. And in a way, I think it's subtle that people, when they leave Sumbel, oftentimes it's late at night and there's a lot of people, but they feel an invigoration in a way they feel a deeper connection to people. They feel a heightened sense of faith. There's a lot going on, and all of that is, again, stirring the waters. It's the words go out and the mead goes in, and all of that is stirring and activating a lot of that of the soul, changing things, making things grow. So I think that's another reason outside of everything you covered about just the fact that it is at symbol in that utilization.
All right. Also from Caleb, do you think the Bifrost more closely resembles the rainbow or the aurora borealis? Svan.
I think it's the rainbow. I think it's clear and it's concise. I think there's also a point, because remember we talk about, or I've been talking about relationships. The bridge to heaven is the shimmering path. It is made of light and of fire and is not easily attainable. Whereas the bridge to Helgard is wide and strong and a covered bridge, which symbolically is speaking of a bridge that is not weathered, but protected. So it is ever accessible. And you notice these two relationships almost immediately. Now, why the rainbow over the aurora borealis? Couple of reasons. And one of them, and I talked about it already with like the owl in the sagas. The owl is only mentioned once by the beak of an owl, and it's in a flippant kind of list of things. That doesn't mean that our ancestors didn't know what an owl was. But interestingly enough, the aurora borealis is not mentioned anywhere. And there is a lot of theories to that. One of them majorly being that the poles might not have been aligned at the same position that they are today. And we do know about polar shifts and all of these things. So a lot of folks kind of attested to the idea that they didn't write it down because they weren't really getting any of it at the time. And I don't know about that. I don't know enough about the polar shifts in chronological history and how much validity that theory has. But I've also heard a lot of other things. It's the shining glimmer of the roofs of heaven, or the armor of the Einherjar. That actually comes from a book called Bullfinch's Mythology. It's the only place it's ever mentioned, and there's no attestment to it anywhere in the Eddas. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or incorrect, in the sense that, if it had come about from a place of faith, these things, the beauty and the poeticism of it, I think, are interesting. But we have to be honest, it is mentioned there and nowhere before then. But it is carried throughout the internet. The other is that it's associated with Ullr, and Ullr, with his name having a theorized etymology of the shining. It's not really theorized. It does mean like glorious, and that kind of goes in with brightness. And there's always a connection of light and brightness to the gods. And I'm not denying that, but there was some connection, predominantly because the light and the shiningness that shows up in winter. But there's no lore connection. And so with all of that, the ultimate point of it is you can't, I think, in this day and age, not look at the heavens, but I've always associated it with Ljósalfheim, with the light. And the reason that when the gods, as we were speaking about Ausgarth and how there is a heaven above a heaven, and then there is a heaven beyond that heaven, and that these places will come into being when Ragnarok comes, that the souls of the Einherjar and those in heaven will reside there, but right now none reside there but the light elves. And what we're seeing is kind of this kind of furthering or escalation of the heavens. And we already know that that association is that the light elves reside there despite no one else does. The gods are living in Asgard, but at the edge of heaven, or at the uppermost of heaven, as it's kind of often translated. So I've always associated with the Liosalf, but there is no lore stating either way. But I do think the definitive point of the bridge of fire, the prismatic ray of light descending from the upper realm, and the fact that it is thin and it is not able to carry holy Thor, all of these attestments are building on the idea that heaven is not a place attainable by the masses. It is exclusatory in that sense, and that the bridge to the dead is ever open. And so attaining that upward ascension is one that requires work, passage, and a kind of honing of the soul, or admittance by the gods. I think that's really, really important, and that's what substantiates the evidence that Bifrost, or the glimmering path, is, more a rainbow than the Northern Lights.
So because it is the theme of the show, what do we associate Bifrost with, be it the rainbow or the aurora? Well, it says really clearly in the text, so I don't think we gotta play with it over much, which is handy. It's described and is told to us. Thou must have seen it. It may be that you call it rainbow when talking about Bifrost, and that in the actual text is Regenboga. So it clearly says that it was seen and understood as the rainbow, and that makes sense, as it clearly goes up into the heavens, and especially when you often don't see it in its full hoop. You see one of the arcs. So yeah, and that's there, and it's in this poem. It's in the Gylfaginning, which I think is all of these questions can be answered in Gylfaginning. Maybe not all, quite a bit of them can. And I think that's why this is such a seminal text for what we're doing. What are the worst sins that someone can commit in Asatru? What would have been done to the perpetrators at the height of Asatru, and what would be done in modern times? Svan, what would you say to that?
Ooh, I would definitely say that, and this seems to be pervading over all Aryan and or Proto-Indo-European faith, is kinslaying. This kind of manifests in different ways. We see it sometimes with the fact that during the migration era, when whole groups of people were moving, the elderly sometimes were given a kind of swift death, so that the whole group could keep moving, because they wouldn't be able to move with them, and they didn't want to leave them behind. It was never done by someone in the family. It was always done by someone outside of the biological bloodline. And so I think that's one point that shows a heavy emphasis of not slaying kin. We also mention it with Loki as Heiti, as the kin slayer, being the blood brother to Lord Odin, thinking that he could push the kin slaying upon another. But by extension, and very poetically, it is that Hother and Loki are, in essence, both brothers. And that is the true poetic tragedy of the story, is the kinslaying of a brother, or of someone of blood, whether it's blood brotherhood or biological. And that seems to be not deeply differentiated in Nordic society, which is another reason why I think kinslaying is such, and was such an important point, was that blood brotherhood was so highly respected that in essence it was comparative to biology, that once you became a blood brother, if you slayed a kinsman that you're not technically biologically related to, it was held in the same gravity. And that's huge. There are others, but I think that is the big one. So the slaying of a child, the slaying of a father or a mother, and I know people will well, what if that person attacks you? Yeah, then you're defending yourself and trying to stop them from doing the very thing that's really bad. But I think people just try to go through intellectual circles to either try to
Yeah, our faith isn't about that. That's a very Hebrew way to look at things. Our faith is much more about nobility of making decisions and choosing paths when things are murky. The nobility, the Aryanness of our fold, is our ability to make informed decisions based on imperfect circumstance. There's a lot of, what about kinslaying? What if your brother's trying to kill your dad? What if whatever? You've got to do what you've got to do. There's not a perfect answer, but the principle is what matters. Or, your brother's a horrible serial killer and he's out, doing stuff in the community, and you can be the one to take care of it, or you can let somebody else. Or what about this? That's not the point. The point is your supreme loyalty to your family and your kin, and the responsibility that entails, and that is such a huge, important part of our faith and our honor. Again, to harken back to the text that we are studying, it talks about Naustrong and those that find themselves there. And so it talks about, oath breakers, talks about specifically, which I thought was a cool term. I'm trying to find it in the text here. Now my searching is failing me. So find it in a second, but specifically wolfish murderers. And I think that the wolfish murderers is actually from the Voluspa. It's something like, anyways, regardless. But the idea of like tricking people and laying in wait and slaying them, sneaking out of the bushes and slaying them, as opposed to it. And that was a really important distinction, our ancestors, between like face-to-face killing of your foe and like treachery. So oath breakers, like treacherous murderers that lie in wait, and people that sneak around and steal other men's wives. So treachery, disloyalty to kin, disloyalty to your tribe, your king, the gods. Those are some of the worst things. Disloyalty to a solemn vow that you've made is one of the worst things. Other things that are particularly bad, again, is those who flee in the face of the enemy and shirk their duty, and deviance like homosexuality. And I think that would extend to other unnatural levels of perversion, like, pedophilia and things. But, you hear in Germania about, they'd hang thieves and murderers and such as an example, like, hey, don't do this or we're going to hang you for criminals. But they would bog stomp the cowards that fled in the face of the enemy, or the homosexuals, because they were gross, and just the thought of that was not something that they wanted to be reminded of by that continued existence among them. So depends on, in like the prime era of Asatru, how would those things be handled? Depends on at what time and what place. I mentioned kind of the bog stomping in a continental way was a thing. Taking vengeance communally by, killing the offender is a thing. Being able to kill the offender openly and it be okay because those kind of actions have those kind of consequences is a thing. And the other thing, which was similar, was outlawry, and the idea that you're completely cut off from the protections of society. Because that meant that likely very bad things would happen to you and you don't have the protection. It would be lawful for people within the society to do whatever they want to you because you don't have anybody to call upon to help you. The further question, what would be done in modern times? Relatively little comparatively. And this is relevant and important, and something that the leadership of the AFA talks about a lot. Our people, truth is one of our virtues. Our people's soul sickness is very deep. The precise group of people that talks the most boldly about courage and about honor and about oaths, our people break oaths all the time. Our people hold oaths in very low regard, unfortunately. We work towards a day where that's not the case. It is where we find ourselves, though, unfortunately. We see that in the world all around us. Oaths of office are just kind of casually, it's just something you say. It's not really something anybody means. Oaths of service, very seldom do people mean all of the wording of them. Marriage oaths, we can look at the divorce rates and things, and that's very obvious in the world around us. And we see that in Asatru too. Everybody's very quick to make oaths, but very seldom do we see people hold to the oaths that they make, unfortunately. And again, we're trying to fix that. I mean, it is what it is. We didn't break it. We are trying to fix it and trying to make it better. In the situation, cowardice, a lot of our people are very, very cowardly, unfortunately. We're trying to rebuild courage within them and rebuild that strength so it's not such a thing. But the things that were held common to our ancestors are very uncommon in today's world. We're trying to heal that. As far as the deviants that are dangerous in their deviancy, then those people would certainly be cut off and ostracized. One of the other things is society was able to act back then in a unified way. All too often now, even amongst Asatru, we don't. So if people are cut off, then all their Asatru friends, a handful will cut them all the way off, but the rest of them will still hang out with them and still treat them like they're, it's all good. So there's not a lot of lesson learned. And oftentimes people don't feel the isolation of, like an outlawry, to where anyone who was in good standing in Asatru would cut them off, and they would be forced to, make some kind of reconciliation and get back right, to be back accepted. In the world today, our people don't do that. When somebody is grievously erred in their, severed from their association with the Asatru Folk Assembly or with other Asatru are, people don't act that way. They, oh, but he's a good guy, he's my buddy. And so there's not the social mechanisms that made those kind of principles reinforced in the time of our ancestors in the same way. And it just kind of is what it is, unfortunately. We're working to get back. It's an overnight thing. I don't think it's a one generational thing, but we are trying to rebuild courage, honor, and dignity amongst our folk and heal that soul sickness that has afflicted so many of our people. I recently found out that there is no pagan representation in the U.S. Congress. Would you consider sending a representative to Washington someday? Svan, what say you?
No, I mean, on behalf of the church, I think that would be your decision. I guess.
Right, well, so of course we would, but so the question is strange. Would we encourage a member of the AFA to run for Congress? Yeah, absolutely. Would like the AFA send one to Congress doesn't really work like that, to where, you know, churches have their representation. Would we send a member of the AFA to serve on some kind of presidential council on religion or something? Absolutely. That'd be great. As far as, you know, you don't run for Congress as a representative of the AFA, you'd run for, you know, representing whatever your district is in whatever state that you're in. But yeah, to get Asatru and specifically AFA members involved politically, absolutely. We certainly encourage any of our people to be as politically involved as they'd like to be, and to take an active part in politics and life in the public sphere, and not, you know, not shying away from it or hiding their faith. The more people live their faith openly, the more it paves the way for others to do so. So we'd love that. That would be fantastic.
I think it also opens up a great point that you've made, or maybe you can elaborate here, but you've made it to me about the apps. There isn't a disconnect, that our people and the governance of the way that we live our lives is interconnected, that we shouldn't try to scurry away from the word politics, and that, you know, we have every right to discuss the ways of governance and what ways we want to go. I think I was even talking about this earlier. There was somebody saying, oh, it's not in the Eddas or this kind of, I guess, like political theory or whatever it is. And it's like, yes, but by your rationale, that means we should all just be monarchists because it's in the Eddas. It's, you know, a king and kingdoms. That's the only way it's ever mentioned. There are many things that our ancestors did not face that we are facing. And as you had said before, it is about that correct action. And one of those ways is very much in the dominion of Forseti, is our correct action to create good governance for our folk going forward. So I don't know if you wanted to expound on that, especially because I remember you talking about we don't shy away. There's like this fear that people have of the politic.
So people do, and a point raised in the chat is to lobbyist clergy, you run close to challenging your 501c3 standing. So here's the thing, even if you were to do that, you create a separate umbrella category under the 501c3, I believe, and you'd have to be very careful with the separation of funds. But I don't think that wasn't my implication, because like I said, you don't run to represent a church, you run to represent a district. I would like for AFA members to run as representatives of their district who happen, you know, if they happen to be Gothar, that's fine. I didn't say that the AFA, or I didn't mean to imply that the AFA would, you know, act as a platforming service or a fundraising thing for that. But to be involved in a, you know, interfaith presidential commission or something, that doesn't involve campaigning. It's a finance issue. That just involves representing your church. And that's a very clearly understood position that a lot of different pastors and priests of other faiths are involved in. But it'd be a strange thing. I think that our membership should get as involved in politics if they'd like, though. But I think that's a good opportunity to clarify. So thank you for bringing that up. Also, Asatru is world embracing and not world rejecting. You shouldn't separate your faith from the way you interface with all of the things you do in your life, with your political affiliations and political positions, with your interactions with your coworkers, with your stances on, how you treat anything and everything you do in your life. All of that should be informed by your faith. So that's important to keep in mind and realize that there's not that separation. The Bible talks about how, a renunciation of that, and how, you should, though you live in the world, you should be no part of it. And this like separation between worldliness and godliness or whatever, that's not present in our faith. That is an Abrahamic thing, and very specifically a Christian nuance that is seldom adhered to, but is not something that's relevant in our faith. Svan, what does rotten shark taste like?
Again, I cannot escape. So it's chewy, and I think the reason why it really hits first is because of the smell. The smell is very similar to like an ammonia, or strangely enough, I was boiling parsnips and there was a smell that came from them that was very similar. There is this kind of a stinging smell to it, or just a pungency. And then, despite it being chewy, the closest thing I could think of is it's like a cheese. It's like a chewier blue cheese that's more dense. And I know that some people, because blue cheese dressing, they think this is very soft, but no, like in a dense form, like if you were to take a cut of it, and it doesn't break apart. It has kind of a chewiness, but it's the ammonia smell, or the pungency smell, and most people kind of just only associate like ammonia in that realm. And that's why I brought up the part about the parsnips, is because I've had a similar, that smells like howcarl, but I would say it like a chewy cheese, not quite on the level of, say, like an octopus or a squid, not that chewy. One down from that, and then one above cheese. That's the best way I could describe it. And then it does have like an aftertaste of that smell. It's like the smell hits you, you eat it, and then it lingers a bit. And that's why they drink the brynevin, the burnt wine, which is, it's a misnomer. It's kind of like the same as brandy wine, brandy or brand, a firebrand in the utilizing it to kind of boil the wine down and remove the water so it can be shipped. It means like burnt wine, but it's a spirit that is drunk, and that tastes like pumpernickel. So when you eat the fish and then drink the brynevin, it removes the more pungent aftertaste that settles in with a pumpernickel flavor. And both of them are kind of nutty, and I don't know. Some people like it. It's an acquired taste. I'm kind of indifferent on it. I don't seek it out, but nor will I turn it away.
Svan is the expert, but I would not see the similarity between blue cheese, because blue cheese is delicious and rotten shark is gross. And it tastes super ammonia-y. But you can get through it. I have eaten it. I would eat a piece again if I was dared to, or if my manhood was challenged. It's not good. I'll tell you that, it's not good.
Yeah, and it's a survival food.
I,
That's really what it is, because of refrigeration issues and
I
things
think
like that.
before I ate a big steak of rotten shark, I'd be getting pretty close to death's door before that sounded like
You
an
literally salt your cod. You live in a cold environment. Put your food in the ground. Don't let it rot first.
Oh,
Stop
so
the rot.
okay.
Rot
So
is-
speaking of combining those things, Eskimos like to take salmon, bury it in the ground, and let it rot, and then they'll eat it, and it's like a spreadable cheese-like substance after it rots for a while.
Right.
So,
Well, and rot is kind of a misnomer, as the rotting part is they're pressing the meat, and it's strange how they may not have known the reason, like, other than a side effect of it is that if you didn't eat it pressed, it caused problems. And I think that's because there is a certain amount of mercury in the flesh of a shark, that in higher concentrations, but they knew that if you pressed it, that went away. So there's this pressing, and then once it's pulled up and out, it's smoked. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's just like rotting. It's not laying out or being that rotting part is about the pressing process.
but taste it. It doesn't taste like fresh shark.
No, but that could get you all kinds of poisons, I guess. It's a curing process.
It's gross. So, Svan, what's your take on this? Because this can mean different things. I've often heard the term Odinic consciousness or similar terminology. Does such a thing actually exist, or is it spiritual egotism?
Well, one thing I think you and I have discussed at length about how Lord Odin, and one aspect of his dominion is the literal folk consciousness, the god of consciousness, especially in his interconnection with the soul through the sacred breath of Ond, the animation, and also our ability to formulate word and place ourselves in context, in the future, which animals do not seem to be able to do. They base everything off of what they have kind of inherited or learned from their predecessors. So Odinic consciousness, I think predominantly what it means when someone's saying it today is they're kind of referring to perhaps even the same as if they were to say Faustian consciousness, or the idea of becoming a honed mind, or leveling up into a mind of greater consciousness or understanding. And the pathways to do that are never really specified by anyone. I mean, I think certain people have perhaps different ways that they might say it's something about abstaining and focus and meditation and working out, they make it very material based. And then perhaps others think that it might be solely in the realm of, say, I don't know, psychedelics or something. But I think what they're trying to correlate is that the higher consciousness is an attempt to be like Lord Odin. And I think that, I mean, one, that's complimentary praise towards the Lord of the consciousness of the folk. He is obviously the one of the Aesir who synthesized with Yggdrasil and traveled the circulatory system of creation to the very source of things. There's a lot of magnificence there, and I think that does imply that. But I think what it's ultimately kind of referring to is this attempt to achieve this super self. And we kind of talk about that with our attainment of what we would call the other self. And we talked about other just a little while ago, passioned self. um, the awareness of committing, where the soul and the mind and the body are completely unified in action, into kind of a primogen of the self, the highest that one can achieve in that moment. And that even the idea is that in that moment you get there and then you could falter later or pass over it and then descend from it. So it's kind of like the zenith of action, body, and mind, all in one, to perhaps even create great swaths of change in fate or law, attaining that moment. I think the Odinic consciousness kind of omits the physical and the spiritual, and so it's often used by people who look at the gods or conceptually or archetypally, and you got to be careful with that part. I don't think the gods are archetypes, and but if they do mean it in a pious sense, that they wish to attain and keep challenging themselves and moving forward and seeking, letting no shadow go unexplored and let no horizon go untouched and let no sky, there is a certain manifestation of energy in that thought that I think is very, very noble and good, and is much of what drives our people. And that drive is that Lord Odin is that consciousness. So the Odinic consciousness of our people is with us. He gave that to us. That is, and it shows up in the things that we do, like attaining the moon, or going west and beyond, or building societies. That fire, that passion to do those things and break those boundaries is the gift that Lord Odin gave us. Or the other and last and final thing is, if he, the giving that is in us is there, if it is there, then perhaps the Odinic consciousness is when we reach the connective point. We work our way to the perfect self, and that synthesizes with the Odinic consciousness that he has given to us in Ond. But it's kind of a hard concept, and I think you're referring predominantly to the modern.
So I think when people say that, there's a bunch of different meanings, and the details really, really matter. One sense is the people trying to emulate Odin, and if you self-actualize enough, you reach some kind of Odin level of stuff. And I don't think that's real. I think that is egotism and presumptuous. I don't think it works that way. He's the god of consciousness. He's the king of the gods. I don't think you become that. If it's to tap into some kind of over consciousness that you can merge with thing, that's more often expressed as the folk soul. And even in that sense, I don't think it's like a nirvana melding of things. I think it's a inherited consciousness that we pull from in terms of ancestral memory and things. But the other thing is the woad self, or the other self, which is the attaining the most actualized, like perfect version of the self that you can be. And again, I don't think that happens, but I think it's like what is it, parabola? What's the thing where you trend ever closer to the line and you don't quite touch it, but you get ever closer and closer and closer? The quest to merge the person that you are with like the idealized perfect version of yourself, like your higher self, the best form of you. That quest, I think, is really important. And we talk about that as a concept a lot. But as a standalone Odinic consciousness thing, like, I don't think you merge with Odin. That's not what we do. Maintaining individual consciousness is very fundamental to us and how we practice. I'd like to acknowledge Frank in North Carolina, who donated $10 each towards Thorshoff, Freyshoff, and towards fixing the heat at Thorshoff. Thank you for that, Frank. We appreciate you. Next up, it's confusing to me how one can be pious and one can brag as well. A pious braggart? Svan, break that down if you would.
Well, I think that there's a misunderstanding in the perception of this. Obviously, bragging today, when we say bragging, there's a clear connection that we make to the idea of puffing oneself up and all of this. But the idea of bragging in the context that we're talking about is more like praise. Now, you can be pious, and there's clearly a connection to piety and praise when you are praising one of the divine or someone else, and that has become socially acceptable, and there's that clear connectivity. But there is a downturning away from praising one's self that is kind of the nose is turned up at, and that's mainly because of the Abrahamic faith, Christianity, that has been brought into Europe, and there is this sense that this is about pride, and pride is a sin, and that's where the true fissure is. You cut it all down, and it goes back to pride, and it's interesting because it's not always consistent. There will be speeches, leaders of war bands fighting for the glory of Christendom or keeping Europe Christian, and they say, I have defeated my enemy here, and I've defeated my enemy here, and I will defeat the enemy now. And so he's singing praise of himself in his convictions, and it's not considered bragging, but it is, and especially in the context of the way that we're applying it. So when you brag, when you sing the praises of oneself, you're not doing it so much at the puff point. It is more about the exclamation of deeds. And again, whether it's done for the gods, whether it's done for your people, or whether it's done for your family, or even for the betterment of yourself, that doesn't degrade it and make it like you're speaking flippant about something. So that's the reason why it isn't the same as the modern usage of the word bragging. And I would equate it to praise. It's praise of the divine. It's praise of the lineage. It's praise of your people. It's praise of your deeds, and praise of your deeds and how it affects all of that. And the things that you are doing to bring people home to the gods, or to defend your nation, or to ensure the safety of your family, and the sacrifices that you made to get there. And you are speaking them out loud, and ultimately it's not taboo in our society, because the Abrahamic concept of pride being a sin is where that makes it taboo.
Yeah, context is the key. So I'm trying to think of where to start on it. So yeah, bragging means what you think it means. but the context matters. If we're all sitting around not talking about how awesome we are, and you're just over there like, yeah, I'm the best guy. I'm the smartest guy that I've ever met. I did this thing. I'm great. Then yeah, you end up looking like a jerk. But if we're all going around the table telling about our deeds and our accomplishments, if you didn't, you'd be odd. In our tradition, in our society, and again, I say that in the society we hearken back to, we're all a product of the world that we're raised in. And all of us know that you don't talk about how great you are all the time. It's socially unacceptable because that's not the norm where you're at. And again, it goes to all the things that Svan was talking about with the Christian understanding of pride. But I want to say bragging is not just about your family or your tribe or the gods. It's about you. But it's expected in a properly ordered Aryan society. Reputation is everything. So you need to legitimize your worth. Like when you do a resume, it's not bragging. You're letting people who you know are going to be evaluating your suitability to a position know about your accomplishments, your experience, the things you bring to the table, your strengths. That's not thought to be bragging. It's just what the expectation is because of the context. So yeah, you'd have a round of drinking where you said, hey, you know, I accomplished this thing. This is a victory I won. I did this, I did that. You're giving a testimonial of your worth to these people that you're introducing yourself with. A line that we use a lot in Asatru that I don't think we always think about the implications of is we are our deeds. If you are your deeds, then, you know, it's not useful for me to say, hi, my name is Matt. It's useful for me to say, hi, I am the champion of this. I am the slayer of this guy. I am the hero of this battle. I am the, you know, builder of this and the, you know, talking about your deeds, we are our deeds. That's what recommends us and what gives us worth. The idea of establishing worth is extremely fundamental. And it's fundamental to piety. It ties it into piety. Worship means and comes from the root of worthship or assigning worthiness to something. We worship the gods by recognizing that they are worthy. We extol their worthiness or their worth. It's the same thing you would want to do with heroes and with your friends and with your associates, is establish and then testify to their worth in front of people. It's part of our marriage tradition too, with the maid of honor and the best man. In Asatru weddings, we often have those people proclaim the worth of the person to be married to demonstrate to those assembled and to the family of you know, the other person that, hey, this guy or this gal is worthy of your son or your daughter. This person is somebody of worth. You know, I often during bloat mention that we give worship through the energy we put in the horn, through the offering, but we also worship by deed. We worship by our accomplishments, by being, you know, worthy. Our gods are magnified when they are worshipped by great people. So we honor them by being people worthy of being proud of. So the establishment and the legitimizing of our worth in front of our peers, in front of our gods, in front of people that we care about is really important. The modern context has a baked in rudeness that wasn't there. But the idea of talking about how great you are, absolutely. But that's okay if we're in a room of people that's what the expectation is, hey, this is what I bring to the table, and you're expected to then tell me what you bring to the table. It doesn't have the same ugliness to it. But I mean, we all know that, we all have that baked in, but we have a toxic, like, fake humility thing that we do a lot of the time. And
I
when
think
we
some of
can,
it could come from, I don't know, our history of blessed are the meek, blessed are the losers, and this
yeah, no, that's
and
exactly
the
what it comes
assignment
from.
of piety to mean, or piousness to mean, like, I don't know, ashamedly humble or uselessly
Well, so it
stupid
means
humility.
literally that man is saved by faith alone, that none might boast. It literally is like, no, you suck. Jesus is the only way to salvation, because you have nothing to brag about because you're worthless. And that's kind of what that faith teaches. But so we do that, and sometimes people take us literally, and fundamentally it's dishonest. I remember we took my friend out to a bar. He was not great with the ladies, and you know, he was telling them how lame he was, and women that were interested were very quickly not interested because he was trying to be overly humble. And he's like, well, and they're like, hey, you want to dance? And he's like, well, I'm not a very good dancer, and I usually don't, I'm not very good with women. They're like, okay, thank you, and went about their business. We get stuck in these false humilities that I think, with truth being one of our virtues, we should try to be aware of and try to avoid a little bit. Our founding fathers generation, they were geniuses and they were tremendously virtuous men in a lot of ways. But it's always kind of gross when you read their letters, and like, George Washington will be writing to some, pretty lowly person, and he will sign off as your humble servant, whatever. You're not nobody's servant. What are you talking about? You have these people that will be high levels of aristocracy, like racing to be as servile and as meek in their signing off letters as they can, because it just became fashionable to be like overly humble, and it's kind of gross, and it's certainly not an honest use of language. So there's a difference between being a jerk. There's certainly a difference between being dishonest and overblowing your claims of accomplishment, and honestly giving people presenting a resume when you go somewhere of, hey, this is who I am, this is what I've done, this is where I've been, so you know who you're dealing with. It's a very honest and open-handed way of dealing with each other. It just is predicated upon the expectation that the people you're talking to are going to do the same. If you're the only one in the room doing it, then you look like a jerk. All right, last question of the night. And we clearly have a lot more goddesses we will go through, and we'll continue to do that. But last question of the night: are there any members of the AFA who practice yoga? Is yoga practice, whether for exercise or spiritual reasons, allowed in the AFA? And is yoga compatible with Asatru as a religion? Svan.
There's multiple parts of that. I mean, I'm sure there's people in the AFA who practice yoga, and
Okay. Svan, are there any members who practice yoga?
Yes, I don't know, but I'm sure there probably is. I have.
Yes, there are many people who practice yoga in the Asatru folk assembly,
and
not so many that I would say it is the norm, but yes, there are AFA members that practice yoga. Svan, is yoga practice, whether for exercise or spiritual reasons, allowed in the AFA?
I don't think it's prohibited at all.
It is absolutely not prohibited.
Yeah.
Svan, is yoga compatible with Asatru as a religion?
Compatibility. I don't see it as incompatible. I think it is much the same as if a member was to do a Japanese martial art. The benefits that they gain can help them, but that there is no direct sort of disjointedness between the two, because of whatever kind of nature it is. Now, when you start to get into yoga as a Hindu practice, that's where it gets very interesting, because a lot of yoga practice in the West is disconnected from, or marginally in the zone, the gray zone, if you will, of the religious connectivity to Hinduism. But if if you're going to do hot yoga at a place to better your health and get and still your mind, I don't think that that's bad at all, and is very parallelly moving with the spiritual faith of your folk. Just like meditation or martial arts or pursuing things that train and hone you to be a better person. But if you do it and do it kind of in the sense of like Hindu spiritualism, and I don't know exactly how deep that goes in because I'm not Hindu. I would then begin to say, okay, this is perhaps creating this differential, because a lot of people like to, I mean, the origins of Hinduism come from the Arya, but what is Hinduism today is very much affected by not the Arya. And so that's where it kind of gets a little dicey. But as far as, going to a local school and practicing and trying to attempt to become more flexible and to become more focused, and stilling your mind and reducing stress and all of that, I kind of compare that to other forms of personal training. And I don't think that that conflicts at all.
Yeah, again, yoga means so many different things to so many different people, and it's kind of implied in the question that people use it for exercise, people use it for meditation. There's all kinds of different styles of yoga. I think Hinduism isn't one for one compatible with Asatru. I think the points of similarity, or recognizing stuff and incorporating a principle or a little piece of something that has a relevance, isn't forbidden or whatever. But I think that you want to practice Asatru, but I think that mantra work is very beneficial and can be easily adapted to Rune Galder. There's a lot of people that do various yoga poses and other forms of meditation to further their Asatru practice, which I think probably does have very similar roots in deep antiquity. I was trying to Google while Svan was talking. There's these horns that have the
body positions.
Yeah, they have almost yoga body positioning on it. You have like the lotus kind of position that Cernunnos is in the Gunstrup Cauldron. There's poses that you see in a lot of carving and art of our ancestors that would imply some kind of forms or physically connected, like spiritually connected physical form practice. Some of those seated or more traditional, what you'd think of as yoga, that exist. Wish I could think of the name of those horns. Anyways, so yeah, I think that there's a compatibility and an overlap. I know a lot of, in the Romantic period, in the early runic awakening in Germany, there was a lot of talk about rune yoga. That's a practice that some people still do, of getting in different runic poses for yoga practice. Yeah, and
You
just as
mentioned mantra. That was also something mentioned in the chat, was mantra as well as mala, and using mala beads.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
said the runic
Yeah,
beads.
and meditation certainly is compatible and very beneficial, and I would encourage some of that. I think there's a lot of overlap. I think trying to pretend you're Hindu is not helpful. I think, keeping it Asatru and keeping Asatru the focus, but using techniques like the physical forms to do that, I think is really beneficial. I think using sound in the way that mantra works is very effective. I think working on meditation to clear your mind and focus your intentionality, focus your contemplation of the gods. I think all of those are very useful and worthwhile things for us to incorporate in Asatru, especially in an individual Asatru practice. I think that's really beneficial, and I know a lot of our folk do that in different ways. I do in different ways, I suppose, meditatively, with Galdra work, with some other things. Our law speaker has a very significant yoga practice and meditative practice that way. Yeah, again, yoga means different things. Sometimes it means the physical poses. Sometimes it's just about breath and meditation work. All of that, I think, is very relevant, and probably versions of that or things very similar were probably practiced by our ancestors. So we continue with our going through the Gylfaginning. There are many goddesses still to cover. Lately I've been trying to keep these at 3 hours or so. We're starting them a little bit later for me where I'm at now, so I'm kind of unifying that a little bit. It's not a hard rule. It's just kind of where I'm cutting it off, because I don't want to cut any of it short. I want to cover it all, and especially give attention to these goddesses that don't get a lot of attention otherwise. I think it's really important, and I'm glad you guys are with us on this journey through the Gylfaginning. Next week, we've got a treat for you guys. We will have folk builder Chris Savage on again to do one of his amazing history presentations, this time about King Radbod and the struggle for Frisia. So that should be exciting. He always does an amazing job with that. And then here in 2 weeks, Sjofn will return, and we will talk about more of our Ausenur. So thank you guys for joining us tonight. Sjofn, thank you for being on the show as always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all the people that donated tonight. We appreciate you guys. It's always, cool to see a bump at the different things we're trying to fundraise for on the Wednesdays, because you guys are so generous. We appreciate it. Don't ever take it for granted. You guys are awesome. I look forward to talking to you again next week. Until then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.
Bye, guys.